Okay. So yeah, if I were to print out, then it gives me this long number. So if I were to keep running it, you see it gives me a different number every single time. Because this is the math.random, so it's just going to randomly give me any number between 0.0 and 1.0. So if I were to create just a simple program that takes it randomly generates a number that would represent a dice being rolled. So what I can do is say math.random times 6, and this will give me a double. And then I can say I want to cast that to an integer, so it prints out a simple number that I can see clean. That would be like a dice roll. So now this would be 3, and if I were to run it again, 4, 4, 3. This random is, yeah. So you can see all these different numbers. So what this is basically doing is it just takes my random value that I get, multiplies it by 6, and then casts it to an integer so that I get a clean number like this. If I were to not cast it as an integer, then I were to run it, I would get this long number that's just not exactly what I want to see. So this is one way to do it with random. So one more thing that I like to do is, so I already have my import here. So if you guys don't have this statement, one thing that you can do is type this. So what this does is imports the random class, similar to the math class, but it has different sort of functions. And then I can create a new random variable. And so what this line of code basically means is I'm saying I'm going to create a variable called rand, and it's from the random class, and I want to create a new random variable. So this line of code is how you define any sort of object that we create from a class. So one thing that we don't really have, that you could do, so my name is class 3. So since this is a class, I can also say class 3 class is equal to new class 3. So this is basically how you define any objects in Java. So obviously this can't really do anything because I don't have any functions defined in my class, but this random will have a bunch of functions that you can use. So what you can do with this random rand is create another random integer 1, and I'll say it's equal to rand.next int 6 plus 1. I'll keep it rand.next int like that. And let me put this back. So yeah, I just put that back to make sure that you're casting this as I was mentioning earlier. But yeah, so going more into this, so if I do rand.next int, this will just give me any random number. And then I can define what range of numbers that I want to get this from. So if I were to put a 6 in here, this will give me numbers from, the numbers can either be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So it will give me a choice of 6 numbers starting from 0. So if I were to roll a dice, obviously you get numbers 1 through 6. So I don't really want to get this 0 value. So one thing that you can do is I want to say to every random number that I get, just add 1. And then what that does is change my output to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then I can print out this random integer, and I'll get 5. And then I run it again, 2, 4. So yeah, you can keep running, you get a different number basically every time. And then this can be as big as you want. So if I were to do 1,000, then you get 320, 397, all these different numbers. So I'll keep it like this for now. And then another thing that you can do is create a double, and I'll say random double. Double is equal to rand.next double. Yeah, so the imports that you guys want to include, or if to use the random class, are java.util.random. I put that in the chat in case you guys want to know. So yeah, random double is just another thing that you can use to get a random number. And I'll say random double. I can print that out too. And then so when you run this random double, this will also just give you a random number between 0 and 1, like that. So it'll be 0.28 in this case. And if I were to run it again, 0.86. So these are just different ways that you can get random numbers. So the import statements you always want to include above where you define your class. So if you have, so in my case, I have public class 3. So you always want to include that above the definition of your class. So what does the next int part do? So this next int and next double basically say, I want to generate a random number. So if I say next int with 6, as I was saying, it will give me numbers from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it'll give me a choice of 6 numbers starting from 0. But then the reason I'm adding this 1 is because I'm trying to get a dice roll, right? This is the example that I was mentioning. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll just type that out.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
So does the random rand work the exact same way as the double random? So like the times 6 implies that it is the numbers between 0 and 5?
So the way that I was doing this was just multiplying that value. So math.random returns, as I showed in the documentation, it will return a number between 0.0 and 1.0. So when I multiply that number by 6, so for example, if I were to get 0.2 as my number and I multiply that by 6, I'll get 1.2. So then that will return 1. So this is not exactly like, oh, I'll just completely randomly get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because it's more like multiplying decimals. But this, with this code, I'm saying, okay, I want to get 0, 1, 2, 3, or 5 plus 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So I'll automatically pick one of those 6 numbers.
And then whereas if you have the rand next double, then you will get the like decimals as well between the integers.
Yeah.
All right.
Some people are, yeah. So just make sure you have the either one of these statements will work. You don't need both of them. So if I were to just include this one, then that works too. Okay. Any other questions on random?
Can you explain it again?
Can I explain it again? Yeah. So one question I see quickly is, how do you get a negative random? So for example, I can take this and just say times -1, and that'll give me negative numbers. That's one way you can do it. But yeah, so explaining it again. So yeah, so this random rand is basically just a new object that we created. And we took the random class and created this object called rand that defines all the different functions and methods that are in the random class. And then one of the functions that we use is called the next int. And then that allowed me to get any numbers from 1 through 6, because I added 1 and I'm getting a choice of 6 numbers. So it's always going to start from 0. So if I were to do this, then it would just be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But since I add 1, it gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So as I showed you guys for the math class, so one thing that I'll do is say Java document random documentation. So here has a bunch of methods again. So you can see next Boolean. So as we learned Booleans last class, true or false. So this will randomly generate true or false value. Next double, next float, next int. So these are a bunch of methods that you can read up on. That gives you more information about the random class. So I'll post that in the chat as well. So just remember, you can do the same thing with strings. I'm not going to go up on Google right now and look it up, but you can just search up Java documentation on strings, then you can see a bunch of different methods along with the substring and length that we covered last class. So the documentation is a really good tool on just understanding different methods. Obviously, you don't need to memorize it. Like in college, obviously, I'm always using Google to see different methods in industry. I'm sure that there's no memorization. Obviously, once you're coding a lot more, you'll get like, I know substring by now because I've been coding for a while. So these methods will come to your mind much quicker. Okay. So we'll go a little bit more now into Booleans. So as we learned last class, I can have a
Wait, sorry,
Boolean.
just one question.
Yeah.
So is the documentation basically like a dictionary of coding terms?
Yeah, you can think of it like that. So the document,
Okay.
the Java documentation has basically all the information. It's as if you're reading a dictionary. Yeah, that's a good analogy. So if I were to read
Got it. And
if I were to read an entire dictionary, I'd understand. I would know every English word. So if I
yeah,
were to read the entire
and when will the,
documentation of Java, then I'll know every single class.
yeah, and when will the tutorial be posted? Like the whole video?
Oh, the video, it should be posted within an hour of the end of class.
Okay.
Oh,
So the link where I post code, so that's also on the tiny URL link, but I'll send it to the chat as well.
Got it. Thank you.
what is
Yeah.
the homework with? So what's
Okay,
the
yeah. So
homework?
going back to Booleans, say is Monday. So today's Monday. So that is equal to true. And then if I have, I'll just say Boolean is false is equal to false. So these are different ways that you can define Booleans. This is what we learned last class. And then one thing that we learned is I can say is false is equal to like this. And then that basically means I want to make is false the opposite of is false. And then after this, the new value of is false would be true. So here it is false. And then when I run this line of code, it'll become true. Yeah, so I'll print out is false, just so you guys can see. We get true because we changed the value here. So one thing that you guys should know is if I'll remove this line for now.
Be brave,
Could you guys all mute yourselves?
Excuse me, I had a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if I could see the compilation code for Java.
What exactly do you mean by that?
The compilation, like how we can actually run it. Like, what do we need to type in?
So yeah, I just run Java and then the name of my class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or name of my file. Sorry.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So Boolean is tells you if it's true or false, right?
Yeah. So Booleans always evaluate to a true value or a false value. These are the only two values it can be.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what's today's homework?
So the homework will post after class. That'll also be on the tiny URL link. Okay, so going back to this, if I were to print out is false, then these two ampersand symbols, and then is Monday. So this basically means, where is it? So these basically mean and. So if I have is false and is Monday, so I'll just make this a little bit clearer. Okay, so we have is false and is true. So if I were to run this, I'll explain exactly what this is doing. We get false. Because what we have here is true. So this evaluates to true and this evaluates to false. So if we're using the and symbol, that basically means I have something evaluating on one side and on the other side. So if both of these are true, then this statement should evaluate to true, because I'm saying true and true will evaluate to true. But false and true will evaluate to false. So true and true, give me true. False and true, give me false. And then obviously false and false, give me false. So now if I were to run this, so this is basically changing the value of false to true. Then when I print it out again, I get a true value because is false is true and is true is true. Oh yeah, so true and false is equal to false. So in this case, these are the same. So these will always evaluate to false. True and false and false and true.
Why would true and false evaluate to false and not true?
Because when you're using this and symbol, it's basically saying I want this to be true and this to be true. So you're saying like, I want if both of these statements are true, then I'll return true. And then if you want to avoid that, then you can do something like this with the or. So these are just the two pipe symbols.
Oh,
Okay, thanks.
And then if you were to
I have a
have
question.
so I'll comment this out again. So is false is evaluating the false and is true is evaluating the true. Then this one should return false, and then this one will return true. Because when you use the or symbol, that's basically saying I want false or true, so then I'll get a true value.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
So if you're saying if you're using the or symbol and you're saying you want either false or true, why would it select true over false?
So so the way that this works is basically saying, if you were to have this in your code, I'm basically saying I want if either of these statements are true, then keep executing. So I'll go into more about how we're going to use this, but what you guys should basically know is that when you have the or symbol, it's basically meaning that if I have a true value, then this will execute to true. But if I have an and value and one of them is false, then it will return a false value. So I'll do the same thing for or. So I have true or true. I get true, true, or false. I get true. False or true. I get true. False or false. I get false. Yeah. So what Lorenzo is saying in the chat is correct. Yeah. So in this case, so I have is false is equal to false. So now if I were to switch these around, now I have is true first and is false. So obviously I have true as true, false as false. So this should evaluate to true again, right? So this one is true. And as you can't really see this while it's compiling, but if you have is true as true, then whenever you're using this or statement, Java basically knows to completely disregard whatever is after this, if there's only one more statement. Because if one of the variables in this case evaluate to true, then Java knows that this will evaluate to true and will return true no matter what. So this may be a little bit confusing right now. We'll go into more depth about exactly how to do all this using if statements, which we'll cover. So one more thing that you guys should know. So I'll copy and paste this. So here are all these different symbols. We have greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, does not equal to, and equals to. So as you guys see, whenever we're creating variables, we use the single equal signs like this so that we say is true is equal to true. So that makes sense. So now another thing that I can do, so I'll quickly just define some variables. So system.out.println x is equals to y. So this evaluates to false, because what this is, the double equals is what you use when you're trying to evaluate whether two different variables are equal to each other. So since 10 is not equal to 9, obviously it's going to return false. So now if I were to change this value to 9, then it'll return true. So you can always use this to, as I was just saying, evaluate two variables on whether they're equal. So if I put this back to, if I put this back to 10, I can change this to an exclamation mark. So as we saw up here, exclamation mark basically means not. So this switched the value of a Boolean. But in this case, this exclamation mark is basically saying that x is not equal to y. So does that evaluate to true? So does x equal to y? And then if I were to run that, then I get a true because x does not equal to y. So if I change this back to the 9 again and run it, then I get a false because x is equal to y. So these are just a couple of ways on exactly how you can compare different variables. Yeah, I'll put all these symbols in the chat. So yeah, a lot of this is you guys probably have learned in school, like greater than, less than. So you can do the same thing with these greater than. So if I do greater than, then it will say, is X greater than Y? That's basically what I'm trying to evaluate. And then I get a true value because X is greater than Y. And then now if I were to change that, then obviously I'll get false because X is not greater than Y. And then the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Oh, so I'll actually show this real quick. So now X is equal to 9 and Y is equal to 9. So is X greater than Y? I get it false because X is not greater than Y, but it's actually equal. So if I want to handle a case where it is equal to also, then I can do greater than equals to, and then that will return true because X is greater than or equal to Y. And then you can do the same thing with less than or equal to. This will also return true, and then this will also return false. So these are just simple operators. Yeah, so what Abhinav was saying in the chat is right. So you can't have a symbol like this. This is not valid. You always want to make sure that the exclamation comes beforehand. Any questions on that? Okay. I'll move on. So now we've learned a lot about different variables. We've learned about how to compare variables, especially integers. We've learned and or statements and exactly with Boolean values. So now one thing that is commonly used in programming in any language that you'll use. Yeah, I'll do a review at the end. So one common thing that we always use is an if statement. So I'll just type this out for now. So this is not how it's always going to look, but this is the format of whenever you want to use an if statement in Java. So this is basically saying if whatever condition I have, I want to execute this code. So one thing that I can do is I say if 20 is greater than 18, then I want to say system.out.println 20 is greater than 18. And I can run this code, and then it'll, let me comment this out. And then I get 20 is greater than 18 because in fact, this was able to get executed as this evaluates a true, and then it prints out the value. So I can make this a little bit more using our variable. So if I say if X is equals to Y, so this is basically saying can everyone mute themselves? Okay, yeah, so if X is equals to Y, so this is just basically saying does X equal Y, then I want to print out X is equal to Y. And if I were to run that, then I get X is equal to Y. So then now if I were to change my value of X to 10, so now 10 does not equal to 9, then I run this, nothing happens because this if statement never gets executed because this did not evaluate to true. So if I want this to evaluate to true now, I can say if X is greater than Y, and then now it will print out. So those are just, this is basically the entire concept of an if statement, meaning that if this will evaluate to true, then I'll execute this if statement. So now, one thing that we can do is I can create an else here. So what this basically does is say, I'll say like this, else X is so now I have if X is greater than Y, print out X is greater, X is greater than Y. else I want to say x is less than y. So right now, if I have x equal to 5 and y equals to 9, which part of the if else statement should get executed? Someone type in the chat. Yeah, so the else. So now since this evaluates the false, this will go into the else branch. So then now I see x is less than y. And then I can basically change my numbers. I can make this 100, and then I'll see x is greater than y. I can say this is 101 now. And it says x is less than y. So you can change your variables and it can execute the different statements that are both. So now this only handles whether x is greater than y or if x is less than y. So one thing that I can do is else if x is equals to y. And I'll put this here. And then I'll say x is equal to y. So now if I have both of them at 100, then it says x is equal to y. So this is a common example of what an if else statement looks like. So these two statements, else if and else, can never be written in your program unless you actually include this if statement. So if I were to try to run this like this, and let's say I'll comment this out. If I just try to run this, for example, then Java gives me this nasty error. It says else without an if. So that basically means Java always wants me to include this in my, always include the if statement before you include an else if or an else. Any questions on this, on conditions with if statements or anything? Okay. We'll do a quick example right now. So let's say I'm on, so you guys should know like what kind of like a 24-hour clock is. So like you have, so like 1 p.m. is considered, so 1 p.m. is 13 like that. So 2 p.m. is 14, so on like that. And then like obviously 10 a.m. is 10 o'clock. So this is what a 24-hour clock is. So if I were to have int time is equal to 15, then I can create a quick if statement. I say if my time is less than 12, I'll say good morning. Else if time. So I'm going to write this code real quick and then I'll explain. So this is just a quick example on if I were to get a time. So I get time here to be 15. And say if my time is less than 12, meaning that it's before noon, then I want to say good morning because it would be the morning. Oh, let me change this. And I want to say good morning. So then now what this statement is doing is I'm saying if the time is greater than or equal to 12, meaning it's noon, and the time is less than or equal to 17, which is about 5 p.m. If it's between noon and 5 p.m., then I want to say good afternoon. Otherwise, I want to say good evening, meaning it's after 5 p.m. It's the nighttime. So what this and statement does, it basically first checks, is time greater than or equal to 12? So my time is currently 15. Yeah, so it is greater than or equal to 12. And then now I see, is time less than or equal to 17? Yes, time is less than or equal to 17. So I want to print out good afternoon. So now, oops. So now, oh, I can say, it'll say good afternoon because it is getting executed within here. So now, this is a pretty good example of how to use an and statement. So this ensures that your program will always go into this good afternoon, else if part of the code only when your time is between 12 and 5 p.m. So I'll slow down right now just to catch up on any questions people have. Oh yeah. Can you make it so that it shows real time? Yeah, so I can create a variable that is to the real time. So I'm not going to go into all that right now because that's pretty confusing. We can do that in a future class, but this is just a quick example on if I were to hard code the time. But yeah, it's possible to get the real time, like the current time. So here, people are saying to copy and paste this code. So I'll give you guys this code. Formatting is kind of off when I copy and paste it, but just try to format it to the best of your ability once you get it into your program. So now this is a good example of how to tell time. So I'll comment this out for now. So now we learned up here, as I in last class, how to use this modulus. So this obviously will always give me a remainder. So now if I want to create a simple program that can detect whether a number is odd or even. Yes, I'll do a review at that for the last 5 minutes. This will be the thing that we finish on today. So we have I created an integer number here and I assigned that to 27. So I want to create an if-else statement that basically tells me whether this number is going to be an even number or whether it's going to be an odd number. So what I can do is say if num mod 2 is equal to 0, okay, so the way that you obviously tell whether a number is even or not is you can divide it by 2. So for example, if I have 16, I divide it by 2, then I get no remainder, I get 8. So I know 16 is even. Then if I have 31, I try to divide that by 2, I get a remainder of 1. So I know 31 is odd. So obviously you know how to tell between odd and even numbers. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying I can take my integer number here as 27, and I'll do a mod 2 on it. So divide it by 2, and then return whatever the remainder of that is. So if the remainder of that is 0, then obviously it's an even number. Otherwise, the remainder is going to be a 1. So then the number is odd. So now I can run this code. And it says my number is odd because 27 is an odd number. So now if I were to make this 6, so you know 6 is an even number, then my number is even. You can see how it works like that. And this can work for any number. I can say like that. And since I know it ends in a 1, it should be, it'll be odd. Yeah, you can just play around with this, experiment with different numbers, and yeah, it should always work to be even or odd. So yeah, see some questions about Python. Python, we'll learn about this also tomorrow, a little bit in more depth. We'll go over some other concepts, but if you're interested in the Python class, that's tomorrow. So any other questions on this, on how this code works or why it works, anything? Can you, I don't really understand that question. But okay, yeah, so I'll do a quick review now. Oh, you guys want this code? Yeah, so you guys can play around with that. Okay, so yeah, going back, so I'm not going to review this again. This is in our video from last class about strings. We learned about modulus, so that just gives you the remainder. So now what we learned here was with the math class. So these are just different functions that you can use. These are just different functions that you can use to get the maximum or minimum of a variable. So in this case, we have a and b, 5 and 11. So then the max function should return the maximum number between 5 and 11. So this would be 11. Then the minimum returns the minimum number, the lower number between the two. And I'll make this a little bit cleaner. So then obviously the square root will give me the square root of whatever number that I pass in here. So one thing that actually is good to mention. So for example, I say math.max. So this would work here. So if I were to try to do square root, and I try putting like 30 here, let's put that for example. then it gives me this error. So basically saying method square root in this class math cannot be applied to the given types. Required double found in. So this error is kind of complicated. Once you code a lot more, you'll understand what these mean. But basically what Java is telling me through this error message is saying that this square root function from math only requires one number. So if I were to put in two numbers like this, separated by a comma, it doesn't like that. So it only wants me, and it can only compute the square root on a single number, like this case. And then the math.power, that will be 5 to the power of 2. So you can run it, 25, the square root, 25, the square root of that is 5, then 5 to the power of 2 is 25. And then the last one was the absolute value, which was the absolute value. So turn a negative number to a positive number, as you guys probably have learned in school. So yeah, that'll just give me 4.7 like that. So that's just some stuff that we learned on the math. We learned how to get random numbers with the math. Here I took a random number, so math.random will always return a number between 0.0 and 1.0, and then I multiply that number by 6. And then I can cast that here in an integer. Can't recall if we've learned casting specifically, but this is how you can cast a number. So basically saying, if it's a double, I want to make it an integer so that I don't get all those nasty decimals and I just have a single number. So you can use int in parentheses to do that. I can run that. And yeah, I get 1 this time, but obviously it'll be different random numbers. So now I have created a random object with the variable random. So remember, whenever you want to use this random class, you always need to include this import statement. This will import the random class from Java so that I can use it. And then the next int will give me any integer, and then this would be 10,000 numbers, for example. This is 6 numbers, this is 10 numbers, and it'll always start from 0. So if I don't specify anything else and I just say 10, then the counting will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 9. It'll stop at 9 and not go to 10. But in this case, since I'm trying to do a dice roll, so I have 6 sides on a dice, and I can add 1. So this will basically say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then since I'm adding 1, it'll increment everything. So I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I can print that out. And then I get 1, 6, 4. So, and then this next double, will return a number similar to math.random, any double between 0.0 and 1.0. And then as you guys can see, I got these random numbers are generated by rand.nextDouble. So these are just convenient to use when you want to include any randomness in your program. We'll have some examples of that in the future. And then, yeah, so this is how you define Booleans. We learned about that. So I'll come back to this and or. So this is kind of a confusing concept. I'll come back to that towards the end. That'll be the last thing I review. But so we learned all the different operators here. So we have x is less than y. So this is evaluating which is less than. So we have all this greater than or equals to, less than or equals to. So you can use all of these when you want to evaluate between two different variables or numbers or anything. Like these don't need to be variables, as I was mentioning earlier. I can say 20 is less than 17. And then if I want to print that out, then I get a false. Comment these. Yeah, I'll get a false value because 20 is not less than 17. And then we learned the main syntax of an if statement. So we always want to include our if with our condition. So I say if x is greater than y, then I want to print out this statement. Else if, basically saying if that doesn't execute to true, I want to check if this is true. Does x equal to y? Then I can say x is equal to y. And if none of those evaluated to true, then I go to my else statement so that I say x is less than y. And we can run this one more time. So in this case, x will be greater than y. So I should get x is greater than y. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. Yeah, and then we went through one more example here with the time. So for example, if I have the time 15, then if time is less than 12, good morning. If it's between 12 and 17, which is 12 p.m. and 5 p.m., then good afternoon. Otherwise, I want to say good evening. So one thing I can do is just execute both of these. Oh, forgot to say. Yeah, so then I'll see good afternoon because time is between 12 and 17, and then X is greater than Y, obviously from the previous example. So these are good examples of that. And then the last thing was creating an odd or even number. So here I have a number that's 27, and then I can use the modulus that we learned to get the remainder. And if since that is equal to 0, then it's even, otherwise it's equal to odd. So those are just simple if statements on that. Going back now to and or. So I'll do some examples with if statements here. So I'll say if is true and is false, I'll just print out a 1. And I'll say else. I'm just trying to demonstrate exactly on how you can understand what these are. We have 1, 2, and 3 as our print statements. So this is basically saying if true and, or I'll actually change these. So I'll say if 17 is greater than 20 and okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm saying if 17 is less than 20 and 20 is equal to 20, then I want to print out this statement. So this statement will only get printed out if both of these are evaluating to true. If one of them is evaluating to false, then it will go into the next statement here. And then if I, so class is over. If you guys need to leave, you can. I'm just going to quickly go over and or into a little bit more depth so it's clear on that concept. So feel free to stay, but if you need to leave, this recording will be online. So if we have an or statement here, I have if 17 is less than, so I'll do this. Okay, so when I first execute this if statement, what is going to happen is since this is evaluating to true, both of these are evaluating to true, then it will print out my 1. So I get to print out a 1. So then now, if I change this to a greater than, so then this obviously is going to evaluate to a false. So since there's one false, one of these values to false, then it won't execute in here because I have an and here. And since I have an and, I want both of them to be true. So then it will go into the else if. So then I see is 17, else if 17 is less than, so I can actually do the same thing. If 17 is greater than 20 or 20 does not equal to 20. So now, sorry, I'll change that to an equal to so it's a little bit clearer. So 17 is greater than 20 or 20 is equal to 20. So since 20 is equal to 20, that is in fact true. So I have a true statement here. 17 is greater than 20, that is equal to false. So then now, since I have one true statement, I'm basically saying I either want this statement to be true or I want this statement to be true. So since that statement is true, I'll get a 2. Because since one of these evaluated to true, it will execute my else if statement here. And then obviously, since if both of these are false, so 20 does not equal 20, that will evaluate to false, that will evaluate to false, then it will print out the 3. Because the if did not evaluate to true, the else if did not evaluate to true, so it'll go into my else statement. So hopefully that clears up exactly on when to use and when to use or. Are there any questions on that? So yeah, all the code is going to be posted at the GitHub link. Post it one more time. This will have all of the class code there, so you guys can reference that. So yeah, thank you guys for coming today. If there are any questions, I'll be staying as always after class. Thank you. Yeah, the homework will be posted later tonight.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I attempted to compile the code and I also saved the file in the correct location, but it says for some reason that it could not find or load the main class, which is the file.
So, so is your name class like this, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah. So since class, this is something, yeah, I can actually go over next class as well. But since class is sort of like a key identifier in Java,
Mhm.
you can't really name your classes using this. So if I were to use void also, so void, we'll go into more exactly on what all of these mean, but if I were to use these, I can't use like int, for example, I can't use double. So you can't really use these. So you always want to make sure it's kind of like a unique name. So
I made mine unique. Yeah, I did.
okay. So then what exactly is the error that you're getting?
So the error is basically saying I saved the file on my desktop and then I'm typing in Java, I'm typing in the name of my file .java to compile it. And then it says error could not find or load main class, and then it'll say the file name.
Okay. I think I have an idea of what that is. So if you can actually just send me send me like a screenshot or copy and paste that error, if you can send that to me on Slack, I'll work through that right after class. So I'll just answer any other questions, finish up this call, and then we'll work on that.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Yeah, if there are no other questions, then if you guys are in the Python class, I'll see you guys tomorrow. If not, I'll see you guys next week. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.